Welcome to the Breakup Recovery Podcasts by your host, Barbara Stevens. Discover the wisdom and remarkable insights of Barbara Stevens, breakup recovery mentor, author, and public speaker. Barbara offers programs and solutions for any breakup so you can turn your life around, create lasting changes for the better, and embrace life again.
Hi, I'm Barbara Stevens, and I have Shay with me today. Welcome, Shay, and thank you for being willing to share your story, your insights, and your ideas. Let's start at the beginning of your relationship. How did you meet your husband?
I had just got back from England and had been home for a couple of weeks, and it was a deciding factor for me whether I was going to go back to England and live permanently or remain at home in South Africa. And a girlfriend of mine had taken me out for drinks the one night after work, and I was sitting at the bar, and he came up to me and started chatting to me. He was with a group of friends that my friend knew, and he asked me to dance, and while we were on the dance floor, he said to me, could I ask you for your phone number? And I said, of course you could. And we spent the whole night on the dance floor dancing, and he took me outside, and we were standing outside talking, and one of his friends came past, and he introduced me to his friend as his future wife.
Oh, wow. So he knew right from the start.
Yeah. So we met in a nightclub of all places. And he dropped me off at home, and the next day he was on my doorstep again, and we were just together, inseparable from there, and 2 months later we were engaged.
2 months?
2 months later we were engaged, and 11 months later we were married.
Wow.
Yeah. But I was 28, and he was 33. I was his second marriage. He had been married before. And I had done the travel, and from there decided obviously I wasn't going to go back to England. I was going to stay at home and get married.
Wow. So was it love at first sight for you?
No, it wasn't. For him, I think it was. It did take me a little while. In retrospect, I think had I been more confident in myself, I might not have jumped as quickly as I did. But I was very much in lust, as my father would call it. And there was just something really special about him. He had a really rough childhood, but there was a really good light in him. He just was a really good person when I first met him.
So was there a reason that you got married at the 11th month mark?
Because, ironically enough, my parents, their wedding anniversary is the 11th of July, and they had met the August and got engaged in the December and married in the July, and it was very quick as well. And when he asked me to marry me, I said, great, we'll do it, but I don't want a long engagement. And I wanted to get married in winter. Had to be winter, not summer, because I'm not a summer person. And we got married on the 12th of July. So my parents' wedding anniversary was the 11th of July, and we got married on the 12th in winter.
So tell me about your married life. How did that work for you?
I loved the idea of being a grown-up, for want of a better word, for being married. It's the first time I had ever lived with a man, and I loved that part of coming home and having him there and the security of it all, the security of the marriage. And it was a lot of fun to begin with. It really was. He was desperate to start and have kids right away. I just wanted to enjoy our independence a little bit more, so we waited 2 years before we had our first child. But it was a case I just loved having time together and being grown-ups together and running my own house, and because I don't know, there was just a novelty for me, I think, more than anything else, being in the marriage. But it was, we did have our ups and downs to begin with, but generally speaking, it was just a lot of fun.
And he was a good husband?
He was a good husband. He was a good provider. He was simple things like, when I used to go grocery shopping, I used to get home. He would never let me carry the groceries inside. He'd always come out to the car, carry the heavy stuff. He would never let me do the heavy stuff. He was a real gentleman with that regard. Although Like my place, I did the cooking and the cleaning and all the rest of it, but he was there. He would never let me pick up anything heavy or do anything that was considered, a man's job. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed being treated like a lady.
So he was very considerate.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. So what would you say the challenges would be, the negatives in your relationship?
He had a vicious temper. I put it down to his growing up. He came from an abusive family. They were all physically abused by their parents. So he had a very vicious temper and a very short fuse. And that was a big challenge for me because I used to be very stubborn as well, and I would push the buttons. When we used to have a fight, I used to push the buttons. I knew what would make him flare up, although he never did lay a hand on me, but he did get very explosive.
So when did this part of his personality rear its ugly head in your relationship?
I would say probably about a good 18 months after we met and were married already.
So you knew nothing of this part of his personality until you in fact were married?
Married, yes. Because I think beforehand we were still in the honeymoon phase because we had got married so quickly. We were still new to each other. We hadn't really hit that honeymoon, we were still in the honeymoon phase. I think most people date for a long time, then get married and you get to know all the nitty-gritties. Where we were rushed and got married and then only found out the bad bits once we were in the marriage or once I was in the marriage. And in all honesty, I was brought up where, you get married first, then you have kids. And not that my parents ever expected it from me, but it was just something, what I grew up knowing what marriage was all about. You get married, you have kids, you stay together. So to me, divorce really wasn't an option. It was something that I would have wanted to make my marriage to work. Come hell or high, I got myself into that situation. I was determined I was going to make it work. I didn't want to disappoint my parents. I didn't want to, although I know it's so stupid because my parents are one thing, they would never be disappointed. They would have supported me 100% emphatically. I know that without a doubt. My parents, whatever I had chosen, my parents would have supported me. But for me, it still was a thing. I didn't want to let my parents down. Got married and then get divorced because he had a temper. So I just thought, it was my burden to bear and I had to just get on with it and try and make the most of it.
Do you think, though, that personality trait where he did have the short fuse and where he did have a temper, did you think that was going to be the end of your relationship? Did you think that was something you could work through or you could change in him?
I did try and I hoped we could work through because we had spoken about it. And for me, my words of wisdom was I thought he had to make peace with his childhood and with his parents. And that would give him peace within himself, I think, to accept the fact that he was abused. And we had worked towards that, and he was going to go and have a confrontation with his parents and say, this is what happened, why. But his brother had then subsequently passed away, and his father had basically disowned the brother, and I can understand at the end of the day he didn't want to go back to his father and say, I want to make peace when his father had disowned his youngest brother. So I didn't blame him for not wanting to go and do that, but I tried to sort of tell him that he had to accept what had happened, that he cannot keep on reliving. And it's so difficult because I came from the most loving, supportive family. So at the end of the day, for me to understand what he was going through, I didn't have a clue. But I just thought somewhere along the line, if he could just make peace with it, he would have helped his temper, sort of him cope with his mood swings, his irrational mood swings and his temper, and just make him calm down. And so when he did sort of start losing it, I would generally just get up and walk away because I thought that was the only way I could really cope with it. And when he calmed down, he would talk about it rationally, but when it was happening, he had almost like a blackout where he couldn't even remember half the things he had done or said, or he went into sort of irrational reasoning.
So he never confronted his parents? He
No.
never had a conversation with them? Did he have conversations with his siblings?
Yes.
Okay.
They were, yes.
And they all agreed
Yes.
about their childhood and the effects that it had on them as
Yes.
they were adults and the
Yeah.
way they interacted in relationships and with other people?
Very much so.
Were they all the same?
Yes, all very, very nice people, salt of the earth, but all very dysfunctional, in abusive relationships, and drugs and things like that to try and cope.
Did he ever seek professional help in
No.
terms of
No, because that to him, he wouldn't be a man. He would, that wasn't a manly thing to do, was to seek professional help.
Oh, so that would mean that he was a failure in some way.
Yes.
Oh, that's such a shame. So tell me about your breakup. So how long were you married before you broke up? And then what was the catalyst to your breakup?
We were married for 11 years. The ultimate downfall of our marriage was that he had an affair, which was ironic because his first marriage ended because he walked in on his wife in bed with his best friend. So throughout our marriage, he was always sort of adamant that, he would never do that to me because he had lived through it, and because of it as well, he was very insecure. So he was always sort of adamant that he would respect me. And at the end of the day, that was the downfall of our marriage. We had moved to a new town. We had been here for a sum total of probably about 3 weeks. He had met her, which I didn't know. He told me he wanted to divorce or separate because of financial reasons, and he just didn't think, because the business was going downhill and he was losing his job here in the mining industry, and he just thought financially it would be better off for me to separate from him, to go on my own, because he felt he couldn't support the family, but also the fact that we had been fighting. We'd been fighting for a long time. So we decided to separate, and then about a week later he came and told me that he had actually had an affair, and that was the reason why he wanted to separate. And until then I thought, we could have worked things out, but once he had told me he had had the affair, I was adamant that was me out the door. And then he sort of came back and said, could we give it a go again? And there was no way I was going to go back. But he had previously, 2 years prior to that, my mom had just died, and the day before, and
The day before
my mom had died, and the next day, should I say, we were having a conversation in the kitchen because my father had phoned me and had said he was looking for papers, and he said, your mother used to do everything for me, saying it in a good way, that my mom really took care of my dad. And he took in the way that my mom was totally controlling, and he said it was typical of your mom. She always controlled everything, had to have and I sort of just said, give it a break. My mom's just died. Have some respect. And he let rip and said, well, that's it. If you can't take criticism, I've had enough of this marriage. I want a divorce right now. And that was the day after my mom had died. He told me he wanted a divorce, and I just crumbled into a piece. And it was about a week later when he came back to me and said to me he was very sorry. He didn't mean to disrespect me or my parents, but my mom and all the rest of it. And we got back together. But in retrospect, I think that was the beginning of the downfall of our marriage, was the fact that he wasn't there for me in the most critical time of my life when I needed that support.
So this happened how long before the affair?
2 years.
Okay, so you're married for about 9 years.
Yeah.
Your mum dies. He then has
issues with my mom.
Issues with your
starts
mum.
bad-mouthing my mom the day after she's died.
And says that he wants to leave, and then a week later he apologises. And then 2 years down the track he has an affair, and he says he wants to separate for other reasons, but then comes clean a week later.
Yeah.
What do you think the issues were 2 years prior to your actual divorce as to why that he erupted in such a way and criticised you and your parents?
I think it was we had moved to the Gold Coast. We then moved back to the Northern Territory, and we were trying to save money to buy a house. So we were living with a friend of ours. So it was him and I, our 2 kids, and our friend living in a 2-bedroom unit. So the 4 of us were sharing a bedroom, and it had been doing that for about 2 months so we could save money to buy a house. And I think it was just the close confines and the stress of living on top of each other with an additional person and not being our own space, I think just added fuel to the fire and just became sort of a bit uncomfortable and unbearable.
Had you seen cracks in the marriage before that?
Oh, yes. I honestly think I fell out of love with him a while. a while back. He started drinking when I was pregnant with my first child. He had started drinking. I think he was very, very keen, very eager to become a dad. He wanted to become a dad from the first day we met. But I think the realization of him becoming a father, I think a lot of his childhood reared its ugly head, and he couldn't cope with the fact that I was pregnant, even though he was excited. I think he was fearful as to how he would be as a father, and he started drinking very heavily. And I remember the day I thought I was going into labour that morning, I said to him, I think I'm going into labour, just be aware, keep it, stay close to the phone.
In other words, don't drink.
Don't drink. And when I needed to go to the hospital that night, he'd already polished off a whole bottle of brandy, and he was absolutely blotto. And here I am having to go to hospital, and in pain, having contractions. I had to put him in a bath, sober him up, feed him coffee, looking after him, and I was the one in labour. And the day that she was born, I had emergency cesarean section, and they had put me back into ward, but she was very big and she had to go in an incubator, and he had gone off with the doctor with my daughter, and I was sitting in the ward, and next thing I was left alone. And it was about 2 hours later he came back, and I said, what happened? I said, I've been left alone. I've just given birth. I've had a C-section. I'm emotional. I haven't got my daughter with me. Where have you been? He said he'd gone off to the pub to go and have a celebratory drink with his friends. And there I was sitting in the ward with nothing, and my heart just broke, and I thought, this is the most crucial time of my life, and he disappeared. But then next day he came around and bought me a sapphire and diamond ring and put that on my finger in the hospital, so it was always try to compensate with material things where he couldn't do emotionally be there. And then from there the drinking got better, but it wasn't as problematic. But once we came to Australia, he was stuck in a job where he wasn't really happy, and we had to be in work because of our visa requirements, and his drinking got progressively worse to where I basically say he's a full-blown alcoholic, where as soon as he got home he would crack the first beer, and the only time he would stop drinking is when he either ran out of beer, ran out of money, or passed out.
So tell me, at the time of your breakup, you'd moved countries, you'd moved towns a couple of times, you had 2 children, you had a husband that you had doubts about, and you had your challenges. So how did you feel when the actual breakup happened?
I was scared, not because I was losing my husband. I was scared because I was losing my financial stability. Was my biggest issue, firstly, and secondly, was I'd have to phone and tell my dad that my marriage had fallen apart. I went off to Centrelink, and that put my mind at ease. I walked out there, I met the most wonderful woman, I cried on her shoulder, explained my situation. This woman was the most supportive woman, telling me that I was going to be okay. I walked out of there feeling like a new woman. Okay, I can actually do this on my own. Went home and phoned my dad. At this stage, I didn't know that he'd had the affair. My first question was, who had the affair?
Your father's question
My father's question. And I said, no, Dad, nobody's had an affair. We just sort of decided the marriage isn't working. It's just, but he goes, okay, no worries. He said to me, he's there for me. He said to me, let him know that he'll always be my son. I'm there for him and for you, and I understand and I support you. And he said to me, please don't worry, you haven't disappointed me. It's as long as the kids are okay and you're okay. And to this day, I haven't told my dad that he had an affair.
Oh, wow. You haven't said to your dad you were right?
No, because I didn't, because at the end of the day, he is my children's father. He is their father. And my dad will still have interactions with the ex, and I don't want my dad thinking any less of him.
Okay.
It's important that my dad still, I don't know, just to me, it just as something I didn't think my dad needed to know.
You're a very considerate daughter.
I just didn't want my dad to, I don't know, I think it's just something my dad doesn't need to know.
Okay. So how do you think you got over your breakup? What were your coping skills or strategies?
Faith. Faith in God.
Okay.
That I'm not overly religious. I've always had religion in my life, but I'm not overly religious. I don't go to church, but I'm a believer. And I always remember that I've always been told that God will never give you more than what you can cope with. And that little saying is something that I've always sort of stuck by, that at the end of the day, whatever's laid on my feet, I can cope with. And I had my children. I just thought I have to be strong for them as well. I can't. And in a way as well, it was almost a sense of freedom. That once he left, I didn't have to deal with a drunk man every night, a violently tempered man every night, because the fights became incredibly bad, where I had my daughter sitting in my lap trying to hug me, trying to keep me safe from his tempers. And I had subjected myself to the thought that this was what I was going to have to deal with for the rest of my life. And all of a sudden I realised that I don't have to deal with it. And it was sort of a break, just a sense of freedom.
A weight off your shoulders, so to speak.
Yes, that's it.
So that was your emotional side and your spiritual side, how you got you through your breakup. What were some of the practical things that you did?
I got back into the dating game. You know, for me, I was worried that nobody would ever find me attractive again.
So your self-esteem was fairly low.
Yeah, my self-esteem was shot. I had no self-esteem whatsoever. Here is this man who professed to love me, who had an affair with this beautiful blonde woman. My body is just not what it was. And I was just thought, who's ever going to want me? And I think first of all it was sort of more of a tit for tat, because the woman he had an affair with ended up breaking off the relationship with him. And no skin of his back. He got straight back onto the dating game, started going online dating. And I had actually planned to go overseas. I had gone off to England for 3 weeks, and we had been separated for about 3 months, and I got, and he was already on the dating game, meeting people and all the rest of it. And I thought, no, I need to get back in the saddle and see if anybody finds me worthy or finds any worth in me to want to date. And I got onto a dating website, and all of a sudden I had people wanting to ask me out on dates and take me out on dates and wanting to spend time with me. And it was probably the biggest feeling of self-worth. I know it's very stupid to find self-worth in somebody wanting to date you, but that's what I felt. It was almost like an affirmation that I am worth something.
Yes.
If somebody else wanted me, then it's okay, because I'm worthy of... What am I trying to say? It was an affirmation that I was worth something, that even though the ex didn't want me, somebody else would. And it gave me self-confidence. Yeah. And all of a sudden I found me again, which was was healing for my soul.
Looking back on the end of your relationship, what are your thoughts about that now?
I think it was the best thing ever. Him having an affair was probably a blessing, because the only reason why I would have left him was either him physically hitting me or having an affair. Those would have been the two catalysts. Everything else I would have gone back and made it work, because I would want to do it for my kids, for the marriage. So him having an affair didn't give me an option. And that to me was my biggest saving grace.
Almost grateful.
Very grateful to him for doing that. Because I've just felt that I thought my marriage was something that I was going to be stuck in, and a loveless marriage. And I was stuck there because of my kids. The old adage, stay because of the kids. But at the end of the day, my kids are happier now with us being separated, because they're not in a volatile house where parents are constantly fighting. They don't have to see that anger and that hatred constantly. Even though at the end of the day we're saying we're doing it for our children, we're actually damaging them. It's not benefiting them at all. And to see my little children happier and not scared and just more content because all of a sudden their mother is happy, that's the biggest gift. And I won't change that.
And they're not seeing the destructive behaviour displayed by their father. I mean, that's just not a good thing for children to see.
No, not at all.
So what other tips would you have for other women that are just going through their breakup and having difficulty coping?
Friends. Oh, friends are wonderful. To have that backup support You know, because we had only been here in this little town for a month or so when we separated. So I was new to town, and I had joined a mother's group, and all of a sudden people, just when you say to people, this is what you're going through, I just couldn't believe the compassion and the love that people out there have. And to me, that was really good to have that support, because I didn't have any family here, no close friends. I was all on my own with just me and my kids. But it's okay to, for me, it's okay to say that you're a failure in a marriage, because at the end of the day, it really wasn't a failure as such. I gave it my all, but it didn't work. So I don't think anybody should think they're a failure or if their marriage isn't working, because sometimes everything happens for a reason, and I'm better off because of it.
So friends and support are
And
a
also
huge difference.
be thankful for everything you have. That to me has also been, even though things are really bad, there's so many things to be thankful for. I've got supportive friends, I've got a house, my own home, my kids are happy, I've got my health. Everything that bad happened, something good comes of it. And when you stop and you appreciate what you have, it just makes life a little bit easier, and you can get through it all, one baby step at a time.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shay.
Pleasure.
Thank you for allowing me to interview today. You have had an amazing story, even though I know you thought it wasn't a good story or you didn't have anything to offer, but I am sure that women listening to your story will get some advice or tips, or that will just comfort them in some way. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you, and thank you for asking me to talk. It's actually been good.
If you would like to hear previous Breakup Recovery podcasts, visit barbarastevens.com.au. Connect with Barbara Stevens on social media with Barbara Stevens Breakup Recovery Mentor on Facebook and at You'll Be Okay on Twitter. Read further blogs, view webinar replays, and download your free ebook, 3 Easy Steps to Surviving Your Breakup, and much more at barbarastevens.com.au.